Good morning everyone. This is Kamikawa Kaolin. This time, we will answer the request of Curry 3 Momo. Koreans lie. Chinese people were still better, is the word of an old lady who lived on the pre-war peninsula. Even now, 55 years after the conclusion of the Japan-Korea Treaty, South Korea has created a convenient history and continues to insult Japan. Yes, they haven't changed anything. The lies and betrayals that South Korea showed when it was registered as a World Heritage Site in Meiji Japan's Industrial Revolutionary Heritage. With the resentful Japanese people in the background, South Korea continues to tout that Japan has forced many Koreans to work hard for free. The recent lies and fabrications they talked about Hiroshima, also known as Gunkanjima, it was like watching a déjà vu, a lie with a Korean comfort woman. I think there are many foreigners who do not know Hiroshima. Hiroshima is a small 6.3 hectares island located in Nagasaki City, Nagasaki Prefecture, Japan. Prospered by submarine coal mines from the Meiji era to the Showa era, it is known as Gunkanjima because it looks like a warship. In 1890, Mitsubishi bought it from the former Nabeshima feudal lord Fukuhori. It prospered as a coal mine island for about 100 years. From 1939, the mass migration of Korean workers began in earnest. Many Koreans worked as coal miners along with the Japanese. Coal mines continued after WW2, and in the 1960s it had a population density higher than that of Tokyo. Influenced by energy policy since the 1970s, the mine closed on January 15, 1974, leaving millions of tons of coal behind, ending history. It is now an uninhabited island. However, in the 2000s, it began to attract attention as a modern heritage and as the remains of apartment houses from the Taisho era to the Showa era. In August 2006, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry announced in order to use the industrial facilities of the Meiji era, including Hiroshima, as a tourism resource for the region, we have decided to support the registration as a World Heritage Site. On May 5, 2015, the advisory body, ICOMOS, International Council on Monuments and Sites, of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization UNESCO. About all 23 facilities of Meiji Japan's Industrial Revolutionary Heritage, centered on heavy industry facilities of the Meiji era from the end of the Edo period including Hiroshima, we recommended that you register it as a World Cultural Heritage Site. Then, South Korea cites the public and private sectors because of the past when Japan forced Koreans to work on Gunkanjima. We started a movement to prevent Hiroshima from being registered as a World Cultural Heritage Site. At the Joint Secretary meeting of the Japan-Korea Parliamentary Union held in Seoul, South Korea on May 11, 2015, regarding the fact that the Korean government opposes the registration of Meiji Japan's Industrial Revolutionary Heritage as a World Cultural Heritage Site. Japan asked the South Korean side for their understanding so that it would not become a political issue, and confirmed that it would continue discussions. However, the next day, the National Assembly of South Korea held a plenary session. In response to the Japanese government promoting the registration of Meiji Japan's Industrial Revolutionary Heritage as a World Cultural Heritage, they passed and adopted a resolution to denounce this. On May 20, 2015, South Korean President Park Geun-hye met with UNESCO Secretary General Bakava. Applying for World Heritage registration with your back to history, it causes unnecessary division between nations. And directly communicated the opposition to registration. A foreign ministers meeting was held between Fumio Kishida of Japan and Yoon Byung-se of South Korea on this issue. Instead of helping Japan register South Korea's Baekje historic areas as a World Cultural Heritage Site, South Korea also agreed to support the registration of Meiji Japan's Industrial Revolutionary Heritage. However, the day after the registration of the Baekje historic areas in South Korea was approved, South Korea violates the agreement and begins to express opposition to the registration of Meiji Japan's Industrial Revolutionary Heritage. Eventually the Japanese government conceded to the Korean government and take measures to understand that Japan was implementing a recruitment policy, promising that the registration of Hiroshima was voted. Regarding this result, Korea as Japan, acknowledging the fact that Koreans were forced to work, it became an opportunity to form a Korean-Japanese reconciliation mood. To comfort Korean victims in both countries, we are asking Japan to build a future-oriented Korea-Japan relationship. In response to the World Heritage Committee's resolution calling on the Japanese side to take action to understand the entire history, in June 2020, the government of Japan Industrial Heritage Information Center was set up in Shinjuku-ku, Tokyo to explain the history of the time. It was open to the public, but the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced on June 15. Regarding the opening of the Industrial Heritage Information Center, I strongly protest that Japan has not taken any follow-up measures promised to exhibit the facility. It is extremely regrettable because it contains content that completely distorts historical facts. Was issued a criticism statement. In this, Foreign Minister Kang considered the possibility of cancelling the registration, and at the same time he requested that the World Heritage Committee make a resolution urging the Japanese side to respond. In short, the Korean side, during the Japanese colonial era, a promise to properly inform the fact that forced labor was carried out by Koreans from the Korean peninsula. He strongly criticized the Japanese side for not keeping it and accused him of keeping his promise. But what? Japan has never made such a promise. Which country is distorting history? Don't you think this kind of act in South Korea is shameless and terrible? On the other hand, the Japanese government, we take the resolutions and recommendations of the World Heritage Committee seriously. We have sincerely implemented the measures, including the measures promised by Japan. As a result, it shows that there is no problem in dealing with it. In the Industrial Heritage Information Center, open this time, even though the target period is the Meiji era, there is a completely different exhibition corner of Gunkanjima, Hashima, Nagasaki City, during the war in 1944-45. This is when the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs decides to register with UNESCO. Labor Mobilization National Recruitment Order at the end of World War II. This is because he promised to clearly indicate that there was a person from the Korean peninsula on Gunkanjima, Hashima Island in Nagasaki City. Gunkanjima just before the end of the war is Showa, not Meiji. Even though it is not the period covered by this World Heritage Site, Japan is politely keeping its promises and doing such exhibitions, and there is no so-called criticism from South Korea. What is the intention of South Korea to take such an attitude in spite of this? In the first place, the Korean government has been developing a fierce anti-Japanese propaganda since that time. It is the forced recruitment of comfort women who distorted historical facts. It's exactly the same pattern as the forced labor campaign for recruiters during World War II. The booklet distributed by the Korean government at UNESCO to obstruct registration includes a photograph of a Japanese worker working at a coal mine in Hokkaido was used as a recruitment worker from the Korean peninsula. In other words, it was not Japan but Korea itself that distorted historical facts and forged history. The South Korean side is threatening Japan to accept the history of lies. Since September 1944, based on the National Recruitment Ordinance, for only 7 months, it is true that there was a person from the Korean peninsula who was working. There is no evidence of forced labor as the Korean side says. As was the case with coal mine labor at the time, it's not hard to imagine that we were in harsh working conditions. We are also exhibiting them properly this time. It is also clearly stated that some of the workers were from the Korean peninsula as well as the indigenous people, Japanese. Korean workers at that time were nothing more than legal labor mobilization with wage payments. The inland people worked in the same way. In other words, there was no forced labor from the Korean peninsula. South Korea, with the authority of UNESCO, is trying to impose the history of lies that have bent historical facts on Japan. So, South Korea's argument is like, don't show the truth of history, or show the facts of lies. In addition, South Korea admitted Korean forced labor against the will of the person, and argued that he promised to establish an information center. However, there was no such Korean forced labor against the will of the person. In other words, there is no way to exhibit it. When the Japanese side collected the testimonies of people who have worked locally and their families, there was no testimony such as, "I was forcibly taken and forced to work like a discriminatory hell." Originally it was a lie. In other words, there was no testimony of former islanders that they had been abused. On the contrary, from a former islander of the second-generation Korean in Japan whose father worked at a coal mine on Gunkanjima, I've never heard of being bullied or that being a Korean. Only the testimony came out. However, according to the Chosun Ilbo 6:20 seconds, he accused the Industrial Heritage Information Center of opening with an exhibition that only beautifies the past. South Korea has labeled Gunkanjima as prison island, but no one was a former islander who said such a thing. Naturally, however, evidence and fabrication of the atrocious lies on the Korean side begin here. A picture book for children will be published in South Korea in 2016. Its name is Embarrassing World Cultural Heritage Gunkanjima. Looking at the contents, the following illustrations are drawn. Boys trapped in an iron bar. A whip-bearing official man interrogates a child beside two men hanging upside down. A searchlight that illuminates the darkness so that people do not escape outside the island. It is reminiscent of the Nazi Auschwitz. This is a part of the picture book, Embarrassing World Cultural Heritage Gunkanjima, published in South Korea in 2016. In this picture book, a Korean girl who visited Gunkanjima on a sightseeing trip lost her family on the way. It's a story that slips back in time during the war, but the content is completely different from the facts. We are repeatedly verifying the state of the former Gunkanjima when I asked Mr. Koko Kato, managing director of the National Congress of Industrial Heritage, in the picture book, boys who were forcibly taken from the Korean peninsula by Japanese people, it's working, like a slave, when I showed the picture book to multiple people who actually worked on Gunkanjima, when that doesn't happen, it's definitely denied. It seems that there were Korean workers in Japan, some people came with their families, and there are quite a few people who came alone and later called in their families. Salary and treatment were determined by job function. In other words, no one has seen a barred room like the one depicted, nor a boy's slave labor. There isn't even a tower of searchlights. Rather, many testify that they all supported each other and lived in harmony. Creating such a completely false lie and giving brainwashing education to young children, this is the reality of Korea. It's like crazy, trying to incite anti-Japanese sentiment. This is Korea, a country that does what it seems to be. Not only that, as with the comfort women, some people have been abused. He is a person who calls himself Ji-Yu Young-chul. That this person is a completely fictional character and that his remarks are lies. There is no such person in the Islanders' family register. There is no classmate of the same age. It's clear that it's a lie because I don't know anyone at all. Let's take a look at his contradictory remarks. South Korea's Jongnam Women's newspaper published an article on January 28, 2020. The self-proclaimed Gunkanjima survivor and witness Ji-Yu Young-chul is described as follows. Korean media introduces Gunkanjima survivors and forced recruitment bereaved families. Mr. Ji-Yu Young-chul, 89, Busan's testimony of Gunkanjima's experience was wrapped in a controversy. Even the program broadcast by the pro-leftist media JTBC to protect Mr. Ji-Yu, there are a series of testimonies that are not true. Korea domestic anti-Japanese groups and the media describe Gunkanjima Hishima as the island of hell. As proof of this, Mr. Gu's testimony is brought to the fore. Mr. Ji-Yu has always been introduced as a Gunkanjima survivor. Especially in July 2017, before and after the release of the movie, Battleship Island, Mr. Ji-Yu often visited Gunkanjima during the Japanese colonial era. He testified to Koreans that it was a hellish island full of violence, murder and hunger. The media reported his testimony as is. Look at his biography. Born in Yangsan, Jongnam in 1931, Ji-Yu has a history of being arrested in anti-government movements since 1949. He was not the Workers' Party of South Korea, like the Workers' Party of Korea's Korean branch, in 1950, joined the Workers' Party of Korea, which reports directly to Kim Il-sung. As a guerrilla activity, he has been active in attacking the U.S. military, especially in the Ulsan area. He infiltrated Busan City in 1954, but was arrested, sentenced to life imprisonment, and sentenced to more than 20 years in prison. It was finally released in 1974. The history of fighting the Republic of Korea in an armed struggle for North Korea is ongoing. Mr. Ji-yu is still working with the subordinate forces. He is currently working as an advisor to the Busan Jongbuk branch of the Pan-National Alliance for Nationality, the so-called Pan-Minren. This can also be confirmed in Mr. Gu's dictation autobiography, Thimble's Son. What such a person says, the fact that there is a mass media to post as it is, it makes me wonder what kind of country Korea is. South Korea does not know to stay. Furthermore, based on his story, he even produced the movie, Battleship Island, to instill a half-day consciousness in the people. This movie is from the Japanese colonial rule, the name of the Japanese colonial era in Korea. This is an anti-Japanese movie in which more than 400 Koreans who had been forced to work on Gunkanjima, Hashima, in Nagasaki Prefecture try to escape from their death. It is the content. In this way, even a lie quibble, a lie movie, justify one's remarks. I also made a lie picture book to blame Japan. How can you get along with South Korea, who has been brainwashing for half a day since childhood? Against such hate that depresses Japan, I think both the Japanese government and the private sector must ask South Korea for an apology and remorse. Crush the lie propaganda. Spreading the right history and truth to the world, isn't it the mission and role of the Japanese living in the present? And, Koreans lie. Chinese people were still better, is the word of an old lady who lived on the pre-war peninsula. The Japanese, and people all over the world, should never forget this word. Don't be fooled by false propaganda. That's all.